last office too, didn't you?
It works. It works so well. It's very, very comfortable in here. It's kind of, it's an orange color. It's
Like a
a
warm
little bit
yellow?
like pumpkin. It's
Okay.
yeah. It's like yeah. It's very, very warm. It probably looks yellow because I have accent lights, as opposed to lights that shine down. I've got accent lights shining up at the walls, and so right behind me it'll look, or on this side it'll look yellow. But if you
Okay.
look out, it's kind of
Okay.
closer to orange once you sort of
Yeah, it's
pass the accent light.
like clementine.
Oh, that's a good
Well,
one.
yeah, I that my color palette is fairly unsophisticated, so I'm not sure what that color is, but this is the one, and everyone's kind of giving me a hard time about it. They're like, "Hey, it's just like you never changed your office," and
Well, I love
yeah,
it.
well, it worked.
It's color therapy for my eyes. That
Yeah,
teal and that warm tone. It's really nice.
yeah, it's nice.
Cool.
It's a nice place to spend some time.
Well, hello everybody. We're live on YouTube and X, and today we're joined by Robin Atkins and Amy Sousa. Robin joined us a couple of weeks ago for a really good chat, and so we're excited to sort of continue the themes that we were talking about during that conversation. And Amy, you came up during the chat. Robin said or maybe it was just after, she's like, we got to get Amy to talk about these things because she's really strong on some of these points that we were getting into. And Amy, you're probably my favorite women's rights activist, so it's great to see you and have the chance to talk with you in person, or whatever this is, face
Yeah, thank
to
you.
face, Zoomish.
It's so good to be here with everyone.
Yeah, it's great. And I'm Leslie Elliott Boyce, and I am joined as usual, the usual suspects, Deborah Knox, Jennifer Friend, Aaron Kindsvatter, who's been joining us a lot lately, which is wonderful and delightful. And before we get into a big chat, Deborah, do you want to start us off with the intro to Solid Ground?
Certainly. Solid Ground is a peer support community for anyone concerned about the imposition of critical social justice and or authoritarian measures such as medical mandates in their workplace, university, children's school, or community. We offer weekly online peer support groups in which members share ideas, thoughts, and support for how to navigate the impact of these ideologies and answer the question, where do we go from here? You can join our peer support group for $10 a month, and you can join our forum on locals for just $5 a month. To find out more, please visit solidgroundsupport.com. And please note that Solid Ground does not provide psychotherapy or legal advice. Nothing we do should be construed as such.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So we talked about so many interesting things when we had you with us, Robin. And when we were just chatting before we went live, I asked you if you could recontextualize where we were in that conversation. And you did such a good job that I'll ask you if you don't mind doing that for all of us here, get us reacclimated to the dialogue.
Sure. I don't mind. And I just want to give the disclaimer to anyone watching. I am really sick today. So normally I would not be in sweats in my basement looking like this. And I'm begging everybody's understanding. And I'll be on mute a lot just because I'm blowing my nose a lot. But yeah, so when we were talking about gender ideology last time, we were kind of deconstructing it back to what I think are the origins of it. And so we had dug back in time, back to the 1920s when birth control became really popular, and how, again, I'm not discussing whether or not it should be legal. It has nothing to do with the law, but how that was encouraging us to disconnect from our healthy biology, which started the real disembodiment of how we feel about our body's a burden. And therefore, we become more and more disembodied. And throughout time, throughout the sexual evolution, we saw that increasing. And then, again, not discussing anything about the law, but the abortion movement further encouraging women to disconnect from their healthy biology, pregnancy being a natural biological state of women, puberty being a natural biological state of children. It just moved forward into now children are under attack by their body just for going through puberty. And as we started talking about disembodiment, Amy's kind of my guru for that. And so she does such a wonderful job of discussing embodiment and also the sympathetic nervous system and why it's so important, and how continued attempts to get us to quiet down or ignore or suppress our sympathetic nervous system are so dangerous for women and children, and really anyone vulnerable.
Thanks so much for for sort of setting the landscape for us. And I just open it up to anybody who has thoughts. Just feel free to chime in.
Maybe it would be a good time for Amy and Robin to explain the sympathetic nervous system and how it works, and I guess it's the flip side of the coin. Its relationship with the parasympathetic, and how that plays into concepts of psychology and how people feel from day to day, and why people might want to be working against their sympathetic nervous systems.
I can start, and then Robin, if you want to fill in, I think you may know some more of the uh, biology possibly, but the thing that I like to speak about, and the thing that we see, what we see in our culture, from what Robin explained, from using medications and puberty blockers to disrupt our internal responses. Of course, we also have social media, which is a dissociation as well. And we have also the linguistics right now in gender ideology that are all causing either literal mental disruptions to our internal responses, or physical disruptions to those internal responses. And I like to talk a lot about instincts. I've done a series called Instinct SOS on my Substack, because I am trying to help people understand that all animals are inborn with instincts. Our bodies are our relationship and ability to respond to our embodied instincts is our number one safeguarding system. All animals have inborn instincts that help safeguard them. And a lot of people will tell me these days that humans have evolved past our instincts, but those embodied instincts are still the number one way that we can protect ourselves. And the more that we are in tune and able to be responsive to those instincts, the more we can protect ourselves. And I, of course, am not the only person who speaks about this. I quote Gavin de Becker a lot with his work, The Gift of Fear, and he has a book specifically about safeguarding children called Protecting the Gift. But it is really about the more that we are in our bodies, the more we are attuned to those responses, the better we can protect ourselves. And all other animals in the animal kingdom, when they are rearing their young, they teach their young to be responsive to those adaptive instincts. And humans are the only species on the planet that teach their youngs and tell themselves to disregard those instincts, discount those instincts, dissociate from those instincts. And while other animals are practicing staying even more honed and being even more responsive to those instincts, many of our practices, whether those practices are drugs or whether those practices are, constant social media or drugs or alcohol, we are engaging in practices that dissociate us from those responses. And that is, it's harmful for adults. It's harmful for everyone, but especially for kids, it puts them in a situation where they are more vulnerable to future predation. And with this gender ideology, a lot of the linguistics involved are telling kids that they can't trust the signals of their own bodies. So linguistics that tell them, you can't know if you're a boy or a girl. You can't know if the adults around you are a boy or a girl. Everyone who has been through even the, most junior levels of undergraduate 101 psychology will know that, kids' developmental stages, they go through that language acquisition stage, which is not just a language acquisition stage. It's an authority building stage where they're learning to trust their bodies to tell them the truth about the world. So when they're saying, mommy, there's a tree, and the mom says, yes, that's a tree, and they're saying, daddy, that's a plane, and the dad says, yes, that's a plane. It's not just about language acquisition. It's also about learning that I can trust the signals of my body to tell me the truth about the world around me. And what we are seeing with the gender ideology is telling them the opposite, that you cannot trust the signals of your body. And kids who are living in that state, yeah, they're just a lot more vulnerable to predators around them.
Yeah, so I'll jump in and fill in a little bit more. So, picking up right from there, the parasympathetic nervous system is the part of our system that helps us rest and relax. And we are being encouraged on an everyday basis through media and social media to feel alarm when we're just sitting at home, safe within our own homes. The sky is falling every day. So not only are we being told to ignore our sympathetic nervous system, but we're being told our parasympathetic nervous system is lying to us all the time. And so we're all being triggered or activated to be in constant fear about things that aren't actual physical fears, and being told actual physical fears are not dangers repeatedly. And when I make arguments about human rights, for example, I don't think it's an accident that the human rights that the founders of America identified are all based in our biology, like our right to freedom and pursuit of happiness and life. Those are things we would naturally, biologically defend. It's within our sympathetic nervous system to fight against danger, to fight against captivity, and it's in our parasympathetic nervous system to seek peace. And so it's not a surprise to me that these are the things that are human rights that all humans have, and now those are being consistently, we're being told they're bad. Our human rights are bad for us, and we need to work against those. And so it's interesting. I hear people ask the question, why during COVID lockdowns or restrictions or mandates did some people fight against it and why did other people not? And I think when you have a history of any type of abuse that you've worked through and reconciled, like I have a history of childhood molestation and rape as a teen, you tend to notice your sympathetic nervous system if you've worked through those things and have healed from those things and trust it a little more. And so when things feel off, you tend to, why am I being told like my own body is a weapon and I need to mask when I'm not sick? And so I think a lot of it was who's in tune with their system and who has successfully been told their system is bad.
Kind of going along with what you were saying about being taught to not trust our instincts, Amy, I was thinking about all the ways that we're taught to not trust our intuition, which is really similar. I mean, these are really similar sorts of aspects of our understanding or our relationship to the world that aren't empirically broken down in some kind of a systematic and rigorous way. It's just our understanding. And when you brought up COVID, that I was thinking about the arrogance of our current medical scientific age, which, because we're learning to understand so many more things about life and human behavior and what it means to be here, we suddenly think we understand everything about it and that we can make these broad dictates, which really, really undermine a lot of deeper spiritual, intuitive, instinctual understanding that people have.
Yeah, and that the intuition. I was just looking to my side. I had a book that I was just rereading about it, but I don't see it here now. That intuition is our deep pattern recognition skill set. That happens at that kind of basal part of the brain, and the part of the brain that has to do with emotions, rather than our prefrontal cortex, which is more of our rationalizing, empirical capacities, our linear capacities. Those pattern recognition capacities are happening at the level pre-conscious thought. And again, these are pretty devalued in our culture. We really value more those rational, linear processes that we have, but those processes function sequentially to build a rational thought, like to understand the meaning of the sentence that I'm making right now. You have to wait until I have finished it. You have to process it in a sequential way. But those intuitive processes, those are happening more when we do something like we look at art. When we look at an image, we see it all at once. We're synthesizing all of the information. It's coming to us at the same time. This speaks to our ability to recognize faces or plants or animals, to do the things that we would need to do in nature to survive, is that pattern recognition. And these are holistic synthesizing capacities that we have that are happening in an all at once manner. And so that intuition, which is so important, and we should be teaching our kids how to pay attention to their intuitions. But unfortunately, the intuition is very devalued. And I mean, it took me a long time to understand it myself. I remember when I was a child, my mom would often have, an observation about a person or a situation. And I remember my father would be like, "Oh, Vicky, you're overthinking things. He would try to often talk her out of it because he didn't see it the way she did. And it wasn't until like I was in my 20s, I was like, why do you always stop mom from listening to her intuition? Because she's been right like 100% of the time. She's always right. He always would come back to her and be like, "Oh, I guess you were right about that guy." And it took me forever to be like, mom's always right. Your intuition is always right.
That's
I find myself, oh, go ahead.
This all ties in part of what we were talking about last time and what you all have talked about several times on Solid Ground, with the destruction of the mental health system and education systems, because in psychology, we as therapists are taught to recognize patterns. Just like Amy was talking about, we instinctually recognize facial patterns and what's animal, what's plant, what's mineral, what's human. We're taught to recognize behavior patterns over time. And now students are being taught, rather than recognizing behavior patterns, look at immutable characteristics. And that tells you everything you need to know about the human being, which actually tells you very little about it. So they're being taught in universities to completely ignore their own instincts and their own ability to recognize patterns, and instead look at somebody's skin color or sexuality, and that tells you everything you need to know.
Yeah, and I think, Deborah, you go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Oh, no, you go ahead first, because I might be going a slightly different.
Well, I was thinking about, in terms of pattern recognition and child development, we know that one of the first sort of human patterns that kids start to recognize is male and female. It's probably the very first mental heuristic we form. We can identify male, female before we can identify lots of other things. And it becomes a really automatic thing. And so it's just such an interesting thing that we find ourselves at this point in time when our institutions, our educational system, our government, the sorts of authorities in our society have decided to confuse us and support confusion around this topic. I see a lot of harm being done to a lot of people because of this. And I'm not sure if it's maybe there's some aspects of that are emergent and not top down, but for whatever reason, we have a lot of institutions choosing to support this and promote this. And it's not just sex in terms of gendered sex, like male, female, but also sexual morality is being taught in this. You mentioned counselor education, and one of the things that I don't know if this is getting us too far astray, but like take what you will and leave the rest. But one of the things that I found so confounding is the way that we have this kind of intellectual war on what they call cis heteronormativity and a promotion of anything else. So we're being taught to not trust patterns that have been put in place for a long time, that have worked well and have been very protective for not just women, not just men, but children as well, families, and societal flourishing. So we've kind of just destabilized a lot of these foundational patterns. And I just, I don't really have like a specific question, but I wonder what people's thoughts are about that and what you're making of all of this.
Yeah, I get very it's so delicate to talk about because I have friends who are gay or lesbian, and I don't, no one should be vilified for their sexual orientation. However, this critique of heteronormative society, well, we're a sexually procreating species. So we're always going to, the species drive is to procreate. We are always going to have that heterosexual drive. And that is what is natural. That is the most natural thing to continue being a species. And we've done that for millions of years. So to have this propaganda, it is propaganda right now, telling us that there is something wrong with heteronormativity. Well, that's true of all mammals. All mammals are heterosexual. That is how we procreate sexually. And so I think we have to look at it like propaganda and question why are they introducing that propaganda. And I think it goes back to what was Robin was saying at the very beginning, which is an attack on our biology. The more we attack the heteronormativity, the more we can attack female reproductivity, the more we can introduce birth control, the more we can introduce surrogacy, the more we can introduce IVF, the more we can introduce the things like we're seeing, like these basically men wanting to have artificial wombs implanted. So I think that's where that propaganda goes.
Yeah, I was watching. If you haven't met Katie Faust or talked with her, she's an attorney and a child rights champion. And the other day, she was talking about how IVF and surrogacy is really against what's in a child's best interest, because children's best interest is to be with their biological mother and father. And someone accused her of homophobia. And I was trying to explain, no, homophobia would be saying the government has a right to discriminate against someone who is gay or lesbian. For example, if the government's going to get involved in marriage and define what marriage is, it would be bigoted to say someone who is gay cannot get married. That absolutely would be bigoted. But it's not bigoted to say our biology is designed for male and female to procreate, and children have the right to a biological mother and father. That is not bigoted. That's just acknowledging natural humanity. And so she, again, it's propaganda. She was being attacked as being homophobic or bigoted when she has, I don't know where her views on marriage are or any of that, but she wasn't saying anything around what the law should be around homosexuality. She was just saying children have a right to a biological mother and father. So we come so far away from our own biology that we're not even looking from a child's rights perspective. And that's where I come from the majority of the time when I'm advocating, is from a child's right perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like it really does come down to something fundamentally quite simple, that war on biology, as Amy put it. We think we're smarter than whatever made us. Mm-hmm. And I think that at the root of that, once you start to have this sort of question of, well, is there some innate intelligence in the human body, in our life? Then you're asking sort of a spiritual religious question. And that's the thing that this age has been allergic to. We've got this like really tight hold on secularism as the intellectual gold standard. And so I don't know where we go from there if we can't acknowledge that there's something magical at the root of life that we don't know how to reverse engineer. And everything we try to do to copy that is just a flawed facsimile.
Yeah, I have a philosophy degree, and I often joke that what that taught me is philosophy is the art of making things unnecessarily complicated. It's really what I learned from that degree, because it all does come down to what is naturally designed in, and whatever anyone might think that design, who that designer is or what that design came from. It's all us trying to overpower that. And it's funny when you watch nature outside of humanity. I mean, I could walk outside my house right now, and within the sidewalk, there are going to be, in the spring, plants trying to come up through the concrete and the sidewalk. Like biology, nature is always going to try to heal itself, which is why when people try to have sex transition surgeries, their bodies fight against it for the rest of their lives. And so it's like transhumanism is what we're dealing with. And it is the like worship of want over nature.
Yeah. I think that, transgenderism and transhumanism, it's kind of the pinnacle of that Descartesian thinking that we're still trapped in, which is, I think therefore I am, and my thinking self is primary and more than my sensing self. And when I was studying philosophy, I liked the phenomenologists, because they say we are born sensing beings. Our primary way of being is sensing. Our primary way of being is with. Our primary way of being is not individualized thinking, it's sensing, relating. We are born sensing and with. Before an infant can speak or think thoughts or think in the abstract, an infant is already sensing and responding to its environment. It's already rooting for the breast and showing emotional responses to relate. We are born with. We are born sensing and with, not isolated or separate and abstracting.
It's the one thing been wondering about is, and I don't know if this just went off the rails or there's a place to stop it, because I can see there is the place of, say someone has a fear that actually there isn't any danger, and they're getting the sensors, this is terrible and terrifying, and it's beyond the degree of the actual danger in front of them. And someone may even go to therapy for something like that, and they might be desensitized. And I don't know if we took that way too far. I'm also thinking about in Buddhism, where there'd be so much of like trying to quell, if there's a lot of reactivity, to sort of reduce that. Probably a Buddhist wouldn't say don't move if someone's about to run you over. But I'm curious about where the place is to sometimes have the mind come in and say, this isn't actually as terrifying or bad. Obviously, we've gone extremely way too far, and maybe it's a matter of being able to sort out like what is really a good, true, instinctual signal I'm getting, and what's one that maybe is a little more, I need to do a little reality testing. I don't know where the line is, but I can see there being some place where we might occasionally use our mind to go, wait a minute, I don't need to be freaking out or running away from this because actually it's not okay. But the culture is going way more in the other direction of just suppress that entire fight instinct altogether, and you're a bad person if you don't do it. I mean, obviously that's very bad.
I don't know that we're only doing that. We're doing that, but like I said, we're also intentionally telling people to ignore their parasympathetic nervous system. So I actually, a lot of what I'm doing right now, well, since Trump's inauguration, the majority of my counseling sessions are helping patients recalibrate their parasympathetic nervous system, because they are, a lot of them report, and it doesn't matter who they voted for, kind of everybody's like, everything's crazy all the time. And I have to keep reminding them what's going on in your own home, in your own neighborhood, in your own city, what is within your control. And you can have whatever emotions you have. Emotions aren't good or bad, they are just. And so, but you get to decide which ones you lean into and which ones you lean away from. And so I do think it's really important that people retain the ability to, I am the master of my body, and I am the master of what I lean into and what I lean away from. But that doesn't mean ignoring my body's signals either. Emotions are just signals, and they're not signals really of what's going on out there. They're signals of what's going on in here. And we get to calibrate that to, is that reality? Does what in here reflect what's out there? Or is this something else going on? And most of therapy is whatever's going on in here isn't accurately reflecting out there. And that's what needs repaired. That's what most of therapy is.
I think with what Deborah was saying, my thoughts about that are that it's about balance. Like the mind is a part of the body and we're all a full self, but we're in such an overly cognitive time right now, and we're all like we're sitting in looking at a screen with a bunch of people on it that we are using mostly our mind to understand, because we're not in person with each other, so we can't be in the physical. Even this, and this is a lot better than chatting on a forum and a text-based encounter where you're missing even so much more of the physicality of the person, and we can at least see our faces and see the responses that we have to our conversation. But I think we've just gotten really out of balance. I think that it's great to have your analytical self,
Yeah.
and use the mind for those things that the mind is good at.
Yeah, I think the brain is really good at discernment, and judgment, those healthy judgments, the healthy discernment. But I think we're just out of practice. We practice using our mind so much more than we practice using our intuition and our bodies. And I love what Robin was saying about, I don't remember how you phrased it, but I guess I would phrase it like, our all of our sensations are guides, whether those sensations are emotions or whether those sensations are our physical reactions. And our ability to be responsive to those and to discern them quickly is what keeps us safe. And, our ultimate underlying primary is to go, to avoid pain and to go towards that which is nourishing or pleasurable. And of course, culture is always trying to hijack those signals, either by drugging us during pain or hijacking our pleasure sensations through things like, you could say, like porn, or even, addictive foods, could hijack those signals. But the more that we can practice listening to those signals, the better. The way, you touch a hot pan, you don't have to think, hand, move away, you're getting burned. You just respond. And the more that we can be that responsive to our emotional signals and have discernment about them, the more we're going to keep ourselves safe. Those emotions are also just signals. But I think we're so out of practice being in our bodies. We're so out of practice listening to those signals and feeling what the feelings are. I remember during I've told this story to some clients, and it's resonated with me during my life. I had a moment when I was in work with my mentor, and I was dealing with my trauma. I had had a rape. I have a lot of familiarity with what it is to be extremely dissociated from your own feelings. And we were doing some somatic practices and using images, and I was just, kind of crying out, like, I just want to feel better. I just want to feel better. I just want to feel better. And of course, what I was kind of saying is I want to feel good. But I had an aha in that moment. Like, even when I work through this trauma, pain is still going to come up for me. Shame is going to come up for me. Fear is going to come up for me. Anger is going to come up for me. All of these things are going to come up for me. But what I've been doing is dissociating from them. So this crying out to feel better is actually a crying out to be better at feeling my feelings, so I'm not stuck in them. Because the more I can feel them, the more I have familiarity with them. Like I'm familiar with heat. I touch a hot pan, I'm familiar with that sensation, I can respond to it immediately. But the more I can familiarize myself with my own shame, pain, anger, hurt, sadness, depression, the more I am familiar with those, the more I am able to feel them, the faster I can be responsive to them.
Yeah, there's a book called Hard is Not the Same as Bad.
Mm.
And it's a really, really helpful and important book. The author wrote a book about motherhood, which is a really good balanced look at how motherhood is both beautiful and difficult, and we shouldn't lean too hard into either. It's a balance. But this idea that we should never feel bad really started with the pharmaceutical companies advertising on TV to all of us. Like, you should medicate away any feeling you don't enjoy having. And it's really, that's become to me a pandemic in and of itself, that like we're supposed to medicate away any negative feeling. And I do a ton of grief work with patients. Being in reproductive mental health care, I have lots of patients losing pregnancies. And the faster they acclimate to grief is actually a healthy response to loss. It is love with nowhere to go. And
Mm.
so we feel suppressed in our ability to share that love. The more they're able to sit within it, and the less scary it is, the less traumatic it is, and the more they're able to just coexist. And it does change over time how they feel it, but they're just able to coexist, and it's no longer hijacking all of their system and making them unable to work or be in relationship or function anymore.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah,
I
oh, sorry. Oh,
go ahead. Go ahead, Deborah.
No, just a quick thing on the being familiar with or sitting with it. I'm remembering, I have had some Buddhist background, and there's the cushion, the gom den. The word gom is to become familiar with, and there's the idea, at least in Tibetan Buddhism, that meditation is this. You're talking about, Amy, this becoming familiar with. Yeah.
Jennifer, I'm curious your thoughts.
You're picking on me while I'm entirely empty-headed. I'm just really listening, but not. I don't have a gelled opinion about anything at the moment.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in. I was just thinking about this young woman who told me probably about a year ago that she was angry that nobody had told her you didn't have to have periods. She thought all young women should be given birth control because you shouldn't have to suffer the indignity of a period when there's a perfectly good medication to stop you from having to deal with that. And it was her disgust and discomfort with that bodily experience was so strong that she had this great resentment that she'd had to go through that at all for any period of time before discovering that there were ways to suppress it. And so I wonder, what do you say to someone who is really of that medicalist mindset, that really does see the technologies and the medications we've developed as a way to legitimately avoid physical discomforts? And why would you ever withhold those? Why would you argue against them when they're there? And sure, there are side effects, but there's side effects to just life anyway. So what's sort of an ethical or physical or philosophical objection to someone who thinks like that?
I would probably start by asking them, do they think that their body is inherently flawed or broken? And I would want to know, are they so disconnected with their own physical being that they loathe it? And that case in particular, I would also want to know what their influences were around womanhood and motherhood. Motherhood has been so painted as this terrible, horrible thing for about 50 years now that I encounter a lot of young women just terrified of motherhood, terrified of pregnancy, and wanting to suppress all of that. So much so that, well, part of this goes into also what you were talking about earlier with sexuality and morality. When my daughter turned 12, during that 12-year-old year, I found her in the bottom of the shower crying. And when I was finally able to get her to talk, she was terrified about being sexualized by men. Her own body scared her because so many of her peers had been exposed to porn, and she was already hearing all of these messages around what the female body is for, which they were told the female body is for physical pleasure of others. And that motherhood is the worst possible terrible thing. It prevents you from enjoying pleasure. It prevents you from achieving your goals. You can't be successful if you're a mother. And so she was terrified of her own healthy body changing in really beautiful ways. And so she had to recalibrate all of that. And she had to learn to discern what messages is she receiving and which ones does she want to incorporate and which ones does she want to reflect back out. and just refuse. So that's kind of the work I would probably do with that person, is what do you believe about your own body? What are the messages you're receiving? Where are you receiving them from? Have you heard different messaging from anywhere? And if not, are you open to hearing the other side of it? Um, and I did see the comment that just come up, bodies are inherently flawed. I don't think that our human body is inherently flawed. I think that we are inherently capable of having illness or disease. We are inherently fragile in that sense, but our actual body in and of itself, outside of disease or illness, is not flawed. And having a period is not a disease or an illness. So, yeah.
I'm curious about something. So I think that there's a certain number of females where their period is extraordinarily disruptive to them. And I used to, oh my God, when I first started getting my period, it completely, I mean, it really created havoc in my life. Not the the aspects of having blood or whatever. I always thought that was kind of cool and primal. But what really freaked me out was I started to descend into these horrible depressions where I thought life was not worth living. And my periods were irregular from the get-go. So I could never just say to myself, "Oh, it's just your period coming." And it would knock me out for about a week and a half of every month. And you do have to be able to function. And I spent a lot of time really depressed. And I used to have to stay home from school because my depression prior to my period would become so severe that I knew if anybody looked at me wrong, I would burst into tears, which you do not want to do in junior high. And I suffered like that for years. And it's not that I had poor self care. I knew how to kind of, tend to myself emotionally and physically. But to be honest, it was kind of a nightmare and it was really disruptive to my ability to function. And I did finally go on the pill, and it was a godsend to me. And I had such a severe menopause that it was really debilitating. I don't think I'd be able to work if I were not on hormone replacement therapy because I was getting 3 hours of poor sleep per night. And that's with every coping skill and, something like 30 years experience as a meditator. So I am definitely a person who tends to try to lean towards do whatever's most natural and use the least kind of amount of medicine that you need. That's sort of my thinking. I always think twice even before I pop, an Advil or something. But I am really glad that that stuff exists for whatever ill effects it has had on society. And I'm sure it has had some. I'm also really grateful for it. So I just want to share
I
that
would
perspective.
wonder if you weren't diagnosed with something like endometriosis or PCOS, and that may be the cause of what you were experiencing, because what you're describing isn't a normal period experience for a healthy
No, it's not
functioning
normal.
body. Yeah. So I am definitely not trying to say we shouldn't address illness or disease if it comes up. Like, I had endometriosis. I'm actually extremely angry at the medical community that rather than researching and trying to find the causes of endometriosis or PCOS and trying to cure or help those things, they just shove birth control at all of us, which, sure, that will stop the symptoms because it stops our entire body from functioning the way it's supposed to. But it's not actually a cure. It's just a Band-Aid. And as soon as
Right.
you stop taking it, all of that's back again. Right. So
Yeah.
to me, I'm actually not very much of classic feminist, but that's when I get up on my feminist high horse of why aren't we accurately studying and diagnosing and treating problems women deal with our reproductive systems so we can have healthy alternatives that isn't just shut your body down.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very valid point.
I think there's also a lot of, again, there's the normal period, and there are extreme circumstances, but I do think that a lot of even just women who have in general normal periods, but sometimes a bad one, a lot of that is impacted by diet, what we eat when you're having high sugar, or sometimes, women who are over 21 having alcohol, these things can make those hormonal cycles go crazy. And the fact that we will ignore diet, but then medicate with a pill. I think that is a concern. And also, just the scheduling, this idea that women have to, that we can't take that time to take care of ourselves, that we don't have the red tent community anymore where we can go inward and be still and be quiet and rest and take care of our bodies. And I think that the pill, just sort of like, I think, sort of quote gender affirming care takes agency away from non-conforming kids who might otherwise critique the system. I think in some circumstances, the pill takes agency away from women and girls who might critique the fact that we live in a system that puts these demands on us and doesn't care for our bodies. There's a really charming, funny movie that was made, I think it was in the early 2000s, called No Men Left Behind, that imagines a future where women start procreating by parthenogenesis, and they kind of so there starts to be a disparity in the population of so many more women and girls. Anyway, the point here is that the government of women create these Moon Day holidays every month because there are so many women running the government that they realize this is necessary for the population. And it just imagines that's what a government that cares about women might look like. That's one way it could look. But it would be really amazing if we valued that care time for women, and really valued, especially for young girls, because my periods regulated eventually, but I remember same thing. I had to stay home from school early on because when those hormones kick on, they are especially variable. Your body is in a state of trying to regulate to them and understand them. And I would, back to your question, Leslie, I would say to any young girl, before you make that choice, before you decide to take birth control, what might you learn from your body by listening to it? What is there to be discovered by being attuned to your cycle? Because for myself, I went on Accutane when I was young, and so I did go on birth control young, and I didn't realize things until I got off the birth control. I got off the birth control in my 20s, and when I got off the birth control, I was like, I was blown away by the signals of my body. I was blown away by my own sex drive that had been depressed because of the birth control. I was blown away by my ability to listen to my own signals. I was blown away by my ability to be more in my own emotions. So I feel, personally, my experience with the birth control was that it dissociated me from my ability to listen to some of those cycles and responses. And then, as I became more comfortable with my cycles, I could feel like when my cycle was coming, I could feel like, oh, my emotions are high, interesting. I could be more with myself.
That actually reminds me
Go ahead, Robin.
of Dr. Jordan Peterson interviewed a woman who's an expert on the effects of birth control, and she did research around women's responses to it and women on birth control choosing men very differently than women off birth control choosing men. And that, like, women on birth control tend to choose men that are more passive, and women off birth control tend to choose more alpha males. And that's what the research showed, which was fascinating to me and actually mirrored my own experience as well. I don't know that it was the birth control or just my control issues, but when I was on birth control, I definitely chose men that I can control more easily. And I'm kind of a equal opportunity irritant. So as much as the left might hate all of my pushback on theirs, the right often hates me pointing out, like what you were talking about, Amy, about how our society is still not woman friendly. And so for women going into work, for example, in employment, why don't we have buildings or systems set up to support women's biology rather than, nope, sorry, you have to deal with that on your own. And I'll have on social media, I'll start talking about, like out of the box thinking for ways to be women welcomed into the workplace. And I'll have men who are very much on the right that follow me because of my pushback of the left going, well, why should I have to pay for some woman's biology? I'm like, well, were you born from a woman? Do we not want to support women's biology overall? Should we not, as a whole country, be like, women's biology is kind of important for the continuation of our species. So maybe women who are pregnant should be able to get time off to go to doctor's appointments and have birth and recover from birth in a healthy, natural way that we all support without the government forcing us to do so.
I'd love to get Aaron's thoughts on this. And first, I'll just say really quickly, I like that, Jennifer, you brought up a counterpoint to some of the discussion, because I also tend to be really naturally minded and suspicious of medical engineering and technology that we use. But there's a line, isn't there? I mean, there's definitely ways in which the things that we've done, that the things that we can do to modify our bodies are really helpful. I remember I was talking with a plastic surgeon a few months back, and the kinds of things that they can do with plastic and reconstructive surgery that change lives in an amazing, amazing way. Like a girlfriend of mine, her son, when he was 7, had a bike accident. His bike ran into a car that was actually parked, but he ran into it so hard that he split his little face, open, and he had to have months of reconstructive surgeries. And he looks great. He's an adult now. He's in his 20s and looks great, like very minor scarring, thanks to amazing skills that were used to put this kid back together. He would have been permanently disfigured and, really in horrible shape had that not been available to him. But the same surgical skills that can do that for the child can do a forearm phalloplasty. And so, like, at some point, we're doing something that's really, most of us would say, great, that's wonderful, we support that, we love that. And at some point, we're doing something that a lot of us are saying, whoa, you've gone too far. But both are in the name of, at least ostensibly, improving someone's life and giving them a peace with their body. Likewise with, somebody who's debilitated by hormonal swings and endometriosis, painful periods, all kinds of things that can go haywire with our fertility. And I've got my own stories. I wish we had another hour. We could talk about all these stories. But you can take it too far and be like medicating girls because they don't want a period or whatever it is. So
Yeah.
I think that it's good to bring that counterpoint in, and it's hard to really suss out where's that line. And
Yeah.
anyway, some thoughts, but I want to make sure we have time for Aaron to get a thought in before we wrap up.
I have sort of a meta thought, and getting back to the issue of instincts more generally, and we were talking about the fear as an instinct and how maybe it's okay to feel fear and to think about what is our fear telling us. But another instinct is aggression, and I've often it's been my observation, to the extent that the desire to control is a manifestation of an underlying sort of aggressive impulse. It's been interesting for me to witness how much uh, the aggressive instinct comes into trying to find ways to control our impulses. And I think about the control of moral impulses, that our moral impulses to care for one another seem to have been very intentionally manipulated recently, which strikes me as an outgrowth of a very aggressive underlying instinct. And so I guess what I've been thinking about is, the maybe it's worth talking about at some future point, the degree to which the underlying desire to seize control of other people, perhaps by manipulating their impulses, seems to be part of our society too, or it seems to have been part of our political story. And what the way that we're wanting to control those impulses, varies, but it seems to be, if we look back across various social trends, there seems to have been this desire to grab control and regulate people's impulses, and I wonder if that in and of itself is a manifestation of a kind of aggression, a desire to have other people live our way. So it's that's a little bit meta, but that's something that I've been uh, thinking about. In addition to paying very, very close attention as to how I can be a better husband by understanding the nuances and difficulties of menstruation.
I think the point about aggression is really brilliant, and I've wondered a lot about it's like the zeitgeist right now is such an activist zeitgeist. Like we're
Yeah,
there. How many sentences start with "we need to," "we
yeah,
all need to," "people need to," and that's kind of on every side, right? Like I say that. I don't want to say that. I want to catch myself when I say that and go, "Whoa, don't don't assume what other people need to be doing." But I feel like we live in such an activist time. It's kind of hard not to see things as an extension of the self, but that is
well,
kind of there's an aggression in that.
well, I'm struggling with that too, Leslie, because I used to be such an open-minded person, and such a you do you kind of person, and I've found myself increasingly, uh, being on the side of saying no. Geez, I, uh, I'm starting to want to tell people that maybe they need to live a little more my way, or I'm being more comfortable with being critical of other people's way of living, which is very foreign to me. But I also, in the context of my life, has been on the receiving end of some incredibly aggressive uh, attempts to smear my character and do all. I was talking with some people. I was looking back over um, some things pertaining to a canceling that I experienced, and one of the things that happened, I think, in 2023 is that someone from a university I used to work at wrote my landlord and essentially said that she shouldn't rent to me because
Whoa.
I was harmful to people who were in the building. Um, this was a person, was a psychotherapist who was potentially going to be renting an office in the same building, and sent my landlord an email saying, "Oh, I'd love to rent in your building, but Aaron Kindsvatter has an office there," which struck me as ironic that this person was a mental health counselor and had done something so unincredibly or incredibly aggressive to try to essentially hurt me in the name of being helpful. That I need to protect. I need to protect my patients who might come in and seeing Aaron Kinsvatter's name on the door um, would be harmful to them. Therefore, I'm going to try to get Aaron Kinsvatter. I'm going to try to like really impact his life. I'm going to try to get his office taken away from him, and I'm going to try to get his license taken away from him. So I always, I'm very attuned uh, to manifestations of the aggressive impulse, and I've like witnessed with bewildered irony at how often people will discharge this aggressive energy in the name of benevolent causes. And so that's just something that I'm thinking about, and I'm wondering if we're not talking about our impulses enough. Maybe one of the things that we should be talking about is maybe we are inherently aggressive creatures as well. And perhaps we need to talk about what the healthy uh, manifestation of aggressive impulses might look like. And I don't, and what it probably shouldn't look like. And I've I've been giving a lot of thought to that over the last couple of years as I've looked at people discharging highly aggressive impulses in the name of, social justice or harm or anti-racism or lots of other socially acceptable misnomers to describe essentially the joy of the bully.
Yeah.
So I'm so glad you brought that up, and I'm so glad you're here, Aaron. What you're describing for me sounds a lot like what female aggression looks like, which is submersive and backstage kind of aggression versus male aggression, which tends to be upfront, very in your face, very physical. And I do think aggression is necessary, but we could do a whole nother hour on, like, I'm watching the rise of the Tates on the right, like Andrew Tate being platformed on the right. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So in opposition to this pushback against healthy masculinity, which we've been doing for years, and shutting down healthy aggression, we're going to bring on this super unhealthy aggression to try to balance that out. Like, what are we doing? So I do think you bring up a really good point that aggression is necessary. I mean, men are necessary to protect women and children. And women might not want to hear that, but that's just physically the truth. And women need to be able to have aggression to protect their own children as well and each other. And so I think there's a lot of work still need to be done to what that looks like in a healthy way.
Yeah. My approach to psychology, my background is much more archetypal, and from that archetypal perspective, they would say, we all have a Mars, we all have that inner warrior, and that Mars can be used to fight for causes, fight for justice, protect, be courageous, but that Mars can also be triggered into rage and something that is unhealthy for society. I remember I sort of understood that more. There's a woman, Peggy Reeves Sanday. She's the anthropologist and archaeologist, and has studied non-rape and low rape societies and cultures. Mostly these are small communities that have existed at different various times, but she's looked at what made them be that way. And those communities were able to channel that male aggression into different ways, into the hunt, into protecting the community, into other things than taking that aggression out on women. And one of the things I really like about her work is that it shows that this, that kind of, we are in a rape culture, but this is not necessarily natural to humanity. It's just the way that we have sort of channeled things in our culture, but that aggression can be channeled in other ways. And I think just in terms of our whole society, that all of these values, all of these things are really neutral in and of themselves. It's simply how we channel them or use them that can be a problem. We are communities, and our community has just gotten so big. I think when we are in smaller social units, it's easier to follow that social contract and be in community with one another. But we are really in a global community now, so it's really hard. And we even see, words like kindness and tolerance and inclusivity ultimately being used in really aggressive ways. Being used really threateningly, so I think all of these values are contextual, that they serve purposes in certain contexts, but when they are used, they can all be used inappropriately. Aggression can be used inappropriately, but so can kindness. When people are being kind to predatory men, and allowing serial rapists to be housed with women in women's prisons, that is a really terrible, dominating use of kindness.
I'm mindful of time, and I know we're at the hour, but just real quick, if we have another minute or two. Do you have to go?
I have to jump off.
Okay, well then why don't I save it? I'll hold that thought. And then I just feel this has been so fascinating, you guys. Thank you so much. Robin and Amy for joining us and for this really, really fascinating and powerful discussion. I feel like we could just jump right into hour 2 very easily, but we do need to mind our time. So thank you to everybody who joined us in the chat. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Deborah. And we'll see y'all next week. I'm going to go ahead and stop the stream. If you guys want to hang out for a minute and chat, we can.